Picture the Fairmount drift from a long way out, the way my people always insisted it be observed. From safe distance, from behind shielding, from a position of, and I am quoting our guild charter directly here, sensible cowardice. Pull back far enough and you can see the whole graveyard at once, a slow gray spiral of broken ships circling a dead neutron star like leaves caught in a drain that never finishes draining. There are 400 years of fleets in that spiral. Imperial recovery cruisers with their hulls peeled open like fruit. Corporate dreadnoughts, the pride of 9 industrial worlds, snapped clean across the spine. Pilgrim barges, mercenary skiffs, an entire armada from the Cethran Compact that went silent in a single afternoon and was never heard from again. They are all there, turning and turning, lit from below by the bruised blue glow of a star that should have been left alone. Now zoom in. Past the cruisers, past the dreadnoughts, past the cathedral-sized wrecks of empires that thought money could buy them through a thing that kills regardless of how much you can pay. Zoom all the way into one small, ugly, deeply unimpressive vessel just now coasting to the edge of the kill zone. It is patched in 9 colors. One of its engine cowlings is held on with what I would later learn was industrial adhesive and what the crew cheerfully called hope. It is roughly 1/400th the mass of the smallest fleet that ever died in this place, and aboard it are 11 human beings who have come to do the single most expensive impossibility in recorded galactic history. They have come to recover the Whydah. This is the story of how they did it, every detail. I was there for all of it, and I am the one who logged it, and to this day I do not entirely believe it. My designation is Auditor Thremostek, and you should understand what that means before we go further because it is the whole reason I was aboard. My species are salvage auditors. We are not pilots. We are not engineers. We are not, in any sense the rest of the galaxy would recognize, brave. What we are is meticulous. We keep records. We assess. Above every job we have ever rated hangs a single number, the survivable probability. And we have a law older than most planetary governments that we do not attempt, fund, or endorse any recovery operation below 9%. 9% is the floor. 9% is sacred. In 11,000 years of Aztec record-keeping, we have never once gone below it, and we have a civilization of comfortable, long-lived, exquisitely cautious clerks to show for that discipline. The Whydah had been rated by my own superior at 0.004%. Auditor Prime Vesh Kostek had personally stamped it permanently unrecoverable, the harshest classification we possess, and had assigned me to ride along with the humans for one reason only: to document their deaths, to produce a clean, citable, 11-corpse case study that would close the file on the Fairmount drift forever. That was my job. I want that on the record, since so much of what follows went so badly against it. Let me tell you about their ship, because I cataloged every piece of it in the first 3 hours, and the catalog made me genuinely ill. The vessel was named Margaret Hale after, I was told, somebody's grandmother, which is not a sentence I have ever been able to enter into a guild appraisal. It massed less than a guild lifeboat. Its hull was a salvage yard chimera, panels from 4 different shipyards welded together by hand, the seams visible, the welds proud and unground. Its sensor suite was 3 generations obsolete. Its primary computer had a crack across the casing that someone had decorated with a sticker of a smiling sun. Its medical bay was a converted closet. Its radiation shielding, the thing that was supposed to keep 11 soft bodies alive inside a neutron star's tantrum, rated at less than a third of what the doomed Cethran Armada had carried, and the Cethran Armada was confetti now. I tallied it all. I assigned each system its value. I reached the only conclusion the numbers permitted, which was that this ship could not survive the drift, would not survive the drift, and that my presence aboard it constituted a survivable probability for myself of, generously, 4%. I noted this to the captain. The captain laughed and offered me tea. Here is what kills you in the Fairmount drift, and it is worth understanding precisely because the precision is the entire point. It is not monsters. There are no monsters. It is physics, applied without mercy by a corpse of a star. The first killer is tidal gravity shear. A neutron star packs more mass than a sun into a sphere you could drive across in an afternoon, and the gradient of its pull is so steep that the difference in force between the front of a ship and the back of that same ship can exceed the strength of the metal holding them together. Ships do not get crushed in the drift. They get pulled apart lengthwise, stretched until the spine fails, which is how you end up with a graveyard full of cruisers snapped in two. The second killer is the radiation tide. The star spins, and as it spins it sweeps beams of lethal radiation across the drift on a savage, regular schedule, like a lighthouse built by something that hates sailors. And here is the detail every fleet got wrong, the detail my own guild had in its files and somehow never weighted correctly. Between the sweeps, there is a gap, a window, a pocket of survivable space and time that opens and closes on a fixed rhythm. 11 minutes. You have 11 minutes of working radiation safety, and then the beam comes back around and anything still exposed cooks. 11 minutes. Remember that number. There were 11 of them, which the navigator pointed out was either a good omen or a bad joke, and I never determined which. The captain was Mara Okonkwo, and I will tell you frankly that I did not understand her for most of the operation. She gave very few orders. The navigator was Tomas Reyes, a thin, sleepless man who treated the lethal gravity of the drift the way a musician treats a difficult instrument, with respect and obvious love. The chief engineer was Lillian Frost, who held the entire ship together with her hands and a vocabulary I am not permitted to transcribe in a guild document. The medic was Daniel Cho, the only one who seemed to take my death tally seriously, mostly because it was his job to disagree with it. There was a comms officer named Yoonjae Park, barely more than a child, who talked to the ship's cracked computer as though it were a colleague. There was an old salvage hand named Walter Boyd, who had worked the edge of the drift for 30 years and lost a brother to it and had, I gathered, come back specifically to settle that account. And there were 4 others whose names I logged and whose courage I underestimated. But the thing that stopped my mandibles the first day, the thing I had to read twice in my own notes to believe I had witnessed, was this. When the first genuinely dangerous decision came, Okonkwo did not make it. She called a vote. Every crew member, the captain included, got exactly one voice. A salvage ship running on majority rule, with written articles they had all signed before launch, articles that spelled out shares and risks and the right of any one of them to call a halt. I had read of such arrangements in ancient maritime history and dismissed them as legend. I was now living inside one. A working shift in the drift was the most miserable, exacting, and strangely beautiful thing I have ever recorded. The rhythm was set by the 11-minute window and nothing else. When Park's instruments confirmed the radiation tide had passed, an alarm would sound, soft and almost gentle, and the crew would move. Into the suits out the lock, onto the hull or out to a nearby wreck, every motion drilled and timed, because at minute 9 a different alarm sounded harsher, and at minute 11 anyone not back behind shielding would simply die, and they all knew it, and so the discipline was total. The suits were old and stiff and smelled, I was told, of every previous wearer. The food was a reconstituted paste that Cho assured me contained all necessary nutrients and no detectable joy. They slept in shifts, 4 hours on and 4 hours off, in hammocks strung between conduits, in a ship that groaned constantly as the gravity gradient tested its welds. It was wretched. It was the kind of existence my people would classify as a humanitarian emergency, and the humans in the middle of it sang. Work songs mostly, old ones with a steady beat that helped them haul in rhythm and time their movements to the window. Park had a good voice. Boyd had a terrible one and sang loudest of all. I noted in my log, with no small confusion, that morale aboard the Margaret Hale was, against every model I possessed, high. Now let me tell you the thing that no fleet before them understood, because this is where the humans stopped being a tragedy I was documenting and became something I could not classify. Every recovery operation in 400 years had approached the drift the same way. With power. They brought the biggest engines, the strongest hulls, the heaviest shielding, and they tried to bull their way through the gravity shear by sheer force, holding their ships rigid against a pull that no rigid thing can survive. They fought the drift, and the drift, which does not lose, pulled them apart one after another, the strong ones first because the strong ones resisted hardest. Reyes did not fight it. Reyes read it. He spent the first 9 days doing almost nothing but watching the gravity gradients, mapping the shear the way an old sailor learns a coastline, finding the places where the pull eddied and curled, and crucially, the slow currents where a small light ship could ride the gradient instead of opposing it. He stopped treating the drift as an enemy to be overpowered and started treating it as a sea to be navigated. And a sea does not care how big your engine is, only how well you understand the water. He found a path, a long, looping, counterintuitive path that no dreadnought could ever have flown because no dreadnought could turn that tightly. A path that used the star's own murderous gravity as a current to carry them inward during the radiation windows. It was, I logged, brilliant. It was also subject to one limit even Reyes could not solve. The closer you got to the star itself, the more chaotic the final radiation surge became, and no one, not Reyes, not Park, not the cracked computer with its smiling sun sticker, could predict the last surge near the core of the kill zone. You could ride the current most of the way home. The last stretch was a coin toss with a corpse. On the 18th day, they found her. The Whydah. She was deeper in the kill zone than anyone had ever survived to look, half swallowed by the gravity well, her great dark hull lit blue from below by the star that had been pulling her down for 4 centuries without ever quite finishing the job. She was a colony ark, vast and ancient, built in an age when humanity still launched its ships generation by generation, and she had been lost on her maiden crossing with everything aboard. The galaxy had been hunting her ever since, not for the ship, but for what the record said she carried. The fortune, the single richest cargo manifest ever filed, the accumulated wealth of an entire departing civilization, and every fleet that ever died in the drift had died reaching for it. Okonkwo brought the Margaret Hale to a hovering stop at the edge of the last current, the one Reyes could not predict, and she did not give an order. She called the vote. Park ran the numbers and read them aloud in a flat, careful voice, and I beside her ran my own. Survivable probability of the final approach, 4%, 4%. I said the number into the cabin myself, formally, as my guild duty required, expecting it to end the matter. Boyd looked at the figure for a moment and then said in his terrible voice, "Yeah, that tracks." And then, one by one, 11 hands went up to go in. The push to the Whydah was the worst 2 hours I have endured in a long and deliberately uneventful life, and I will describe it exactly. Reyes took us into the final current at a speed that made the hull scream, riding the gravity gradient down the way a swimmer rides a wave they cannot stop, committed past the point of turning back. The radiation window was open. The clock was running. At minute 4, the shear caught the Margaret Hale's patched seam, the proud unground weld I had so disdained in my catalog, and the hull breached. Not a small breach. A 2-meter tear opening into vacuum and rising radiation, alarms everywhere, atmosphere screaming out, and Frost was already moving before the captain could have ordered it, because there was no time for orders. She went into the breach in a hard suit with a patch kit and her bare hands, and she sealed a tear in a living, flexing hull while the gravity gradient tried to pull the ship apart around her, and the radiation clock counted toward the surge. At minute 8, she was still in there. At minute 9, the harsh alarm sounded. I logged the survivable probability at that moment as 1%, and then, as the unpredictable final surge began to build on Park's instruments, I logged it at a figure I had never written in my professional life. 0. I wrote 0. And Lillian Frost climbed out of the breach at minute 10 with the hull sealed and her suit smoking, and Reyes threaded the Margaret Hale through the surge on a path that should not have existed, and we came through into the dead calm in the lee of the Whyddah's hull with 11 humans and 1 disbelieving auditor still alive. Now the hold. This is the part I have told more times than any other, because this is the part that broke 400 years of galactic certainty over its knee. They cut into the Whyda's central vault, the sealed core that every manifest and every legend and every dead fleet agreed contained the fortune. Okonkwo led the team in herself. I watched through Park's relayed feed, and I confess I watched for the gold, the gemstones, the dense cold weight of metal that 9 industrial worlds had thrown their fleets away to grasp. There was none. The vault was not a treasury. It was a sanctuary. Row upon endless row of cold sleep pods, 10,000 of them ranked in the dark and humming faintly, each one holding a single sleeping human being. Families, children, the grandparents and infants of a colony that had set out to build a new world and had been caught and held by a dead star one crossing short of arrival, and had not died, but slept, 400 years, waiting in the cold for someone to come who was looking for the right thing. The fortune the manifest spoke of was never cargo. The original crew had used the word fortune the way the oldest human languages once did, to mean not wealth but the people you carry, the lives that are your future. Every fleet that ever died in the Fairmount Drift had died searching the wrong holds, prying open empty cargo bays, looking for metal in a ship whose only treasure had a pulse. Okonkwo stood in that humming dark among 10,000 sleeping strangers and put her hand against the nearest pod, and Park, on the relay, was crying. And I, who do not cry, found my records momentarily and unprofessionally interrupted. We were not alone for long. The Guild does not abandon a zero-rated file without confirmation, and so Auditor Prime Vesh Kostek arrived in a heavily shielded observation cutter at the edge of the kill zone, having ridden in along the current rays had mapped, because of course my superior would use the human's path while planning to bury the human's names. Veshk opened a channel and delivered the ruling in the flat ceremonial cadence of our profession. The Whydah was classified non-recoverable. The contents were classified non-recoverable, and then came the line I will carry to the end of my unusually long life. Cold sleepers, Veshk stated, do not constitute recoverable salvage value as they cannot be liquidated. They have no market price. They are, by Guild definition, cargo of zero worth, and a recovery operation that returns cargo of zero worth is, by Guild definition, a failure. Veshk ordered the wreck abandoned. Veshk ordered the humans to log a loss and withdraw. And Mara Okonkwo, listening to my superior explain that 10,000 sleeping children were worth nothing because no one could be made to pay for them, did the only thing she had done the entire voyage when something mattered. She called a vote. I watched 11 exhausted, irradiated, half-broken human beings gather in the groaning cabin of a ship held together with adhesive and hope, and I watched them decide what to do with a fortune the entire galaxy had defined as worthless. The choice was stark, and Park laid it out plainly. The Margaret Hale could not carry both salvage and sleepers. If there had been metal in that vault, they could have filled the hold with it, flown home, and lived rich for the rest of their lives, and every one of them knew the difference between what they were owed and what they were about to do. To tow the cold sleep vault out instead meant jettisoning every recoverable system that wasn't keeping them alive, flying home gutted, arriving with empty pockets and a debt they would spend years repaying, all to deliver 10,000 strangers they would never be thanked by, to a galaxy that had already declared those strangers valueless. Veshk repeated the order to withdraw. Survivable probability of towing the vault out through the drift, Park read aloud, and the number was so low it was an insult to the word probability. Boyd, who had come to this place to settle a debt with the star that took his brother, looked around at the others and said, "Well, we came for the fortune," and 11 hands went up. They got out. I'm still not certain how, and I have the complete telemetry. Frost stripped the Margaret Hale to its skeleton, vented every spare gram of mass into the dark, and the crew rigged the ancient vault to the hull with cable and prayer. Rays flew the long current home with 10,000 additional lives dragging behind them, threading windows that grew narrower under the strain, and twice the harsh alarm sounded with people still outside, and twice they made it in with seconds to spare. Cho worked the whole flight keeping irradiated, exhausted bodies functional on stimulants and refusal. Boyd took a radiation dose pulling a snagged cable free that Cho told him quietly he would not fully walk away from, and Boyd said that was a fair price and went back to work. The ship that limped out of the Fairmount Drift on the 31st day was barely a ship at all. It had no cargo. It had no salvage. It had no value, by every measure my guild had ever stamped onto a file. It carried only 11 injured human beings, one converted auditor, and 10,000 sleepers who did not yet know the cold was over. They woke under a living sun. I was there for that too, at the receiving station of a colony world that had no idea it was about to inherit the lost children of a 400-year-old crossing. And I watched the first pods open, watched a woman draw her first breath in 4 centuries, and look up at a yellow star that was warm and ordinary and alive, and watched a child who had fallen asleep en route to a new world simply finish the journey, late, but finished. The crew of the Margaret Hale stood at the edge of it, gaunt and broke and decorated by no one, and they watched 10,000 strangers wake into a future. And I understood at last the thing I had been failing to log for 31 days. The galaxy had spent 400 years and uncountable fleets measuring the Whydah in metal, in market price, in liquidatable value, and the galaxy had failed every single time because the galaxy was looking for the wrong fortune in the wrong hold. The humans had measured it in lives from the first hour. They had come for the people. That reframing, that single stubborn human refusal to accept that a sleeping child is worth nothing because no one will pay for her, was not incidental to the recovery. It was the entire reason the recovery was possible. You cannot find a treasure you have defined as worthless. They could find it because they had never agreed it was worthless in the first place. I filed my report. Auditor Prime Veshk demanded I classify the operation a failure, 0 recoverable value, file closed. I classified it instead as the only complete and successful recovery in the 400-year history of the Fairmount Drift. And when Veshk asked me to justify a survivable probability of 0.004% ending in 11 living humans and 10,000 recovered lives, I wrote the only line I have ever written that I am certain will outlast me. Our probabilities, I wrote, were correct. They simply measured the wrong thing. We had been calculating the odds of survival as though survival were the goal. The humans were never trying to survive. They were trying to bring everyone home, and they had built their entire small, ugly, magnificent ship, and their entire strange voting law and their entire miserable singing existence around that one purpose. And a being who is willing to spend everything, including the 4%, including the 0%, to carry the lives behind him out of the dark, is operating on a curve my people had never thought to chart. I have requested reassignment. I have asked to ride with them again. They have, against all sense, said yes. The galaxy still tells the story of the Whydah as the only genuine fortune ever recovered, and they are right, though almost none of them understand why. The only fortune worth crossing a graveyard for was never the metal. It was the 10,000 sleeping hearts no one else thought to count. The humans counted them. That is the whole story. That is the only reason it has a happy ending. And the next time some cautious clerk of my acquaintance tells you a thing cannot be recovered because it cannot be sold, I would gently suggest you ask them what, exactly, they think a life is worth, and then go find the nearest human and ask them to go get it.